Welcome to Amp Life, the #1 podcast for amputees, hosted by an amputee, and brought to you by Dilatory Orthotics and Prosthetics, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the Brian Moe, the social media advisor for Dilatory, and I also happen to be a below-knee amputee. Let's get into today's episode. How's it going, everyone? My guest today is the founder and CEO of MomRN and the host of the AskMomRN podcast, Tamara Walker. Tamara, welcome to Amp Life.
Thank you, Brian. I am so happy to be here with you.
Now, I know that you became an amputee at a very early age. Share with us your journey of becoming an amputee and how that has impacted your life.
Well, I did become an amputee at a very early age. I was born with a birth defect, and my right leg was very malformed and was missing a lot of the bones, as well as my foot only had 3 toes, and they were kind of webbed together. At that time, it was so rare that they didn't have a name for it. I have only just recently learned that most likely it was fibular hemimelia, based on the descriptions I've read of that and some research I've done after reading an article about a little girl in my town who has it. I believe that that's probably what my birth defect was. And when I was about 2.5 months of age, they decided that the best course of action would be to do a Symes amputation, which is where they remove the foot at the ankle. And I had to have I think I had an infection shortly after that, had to have a revision done just within like a few days or a week or something. Fortunately, I was way too young to recall any of that. So I consider myself very fortunate in that I've never known anything different. This is just my normal.
Okay, sure. So how was it growing up as an amputee? Did you ever face any type of bullying, or did peers try to exclude you from things because of your amputation?
I was actually really fortunate. Most of my years growing up as a kid, I had a lot of friends that were just very accepting of me. A lot of kids were fascinated by my leg. I remember in first grade back in the early to mid 70s, The Bionic Woman was a very popular TV show. It was my favorite show. And my peers, my classmates actually called me the Bionic Woman when I was in first grade, which I thought was just very cool. And I didn't have a lot of bad experiences until a little bit later in elementary school, probably about 5th or 6th grade. Encountered some kids that were, every once in a while I'd come across a kid who would just think that they could pick on me. Not only do I have one leg, but I'm also very, very short for my age. And so, they thought I was an easy target, I guess. But I had great friends that had my back and were there for me and would, stand up for me if I needed backup, which usually I was pretty good about standing up for myself because my parents really raised me to believe that I wasn't different than the other kids. Yes, I had, a difference, but I could do anything that other kids could do. I was capable and really went out of their way to try to treat me as if I didn't have, a special need or a disability. So that really helped. And I occasionally encountered bullies, but I could handle them pretty well and didn't encounter too much of that.
And, that's pretty fascinating to me because, in the time period that you grew up and I grew up in a very similar time period, we often, one of the things that I always heard, kids can be so mean. And
yes.
I think we still say that today to a degree, but especially back then, I was overweight as a child. I didn't necessarily have a disability, but I was overweight as a child. So I was picked on in some circles in school and different things like that. But one of the things my mother did, and my dad too, was to always reinforce that I could do anything that anyone else could do. And so and for me that helped. And so I didn't throw this into what I wanted to ask you, but it brings up a good point. Do you think that helps us as children be more successful when our parents reinforce that they believe we can do anything anyone else can do?
Oh, absolutely. Because I think that kids need to have that taught to them and modeled for them. And I think, parents need to realize that, yes, even if your child has a disability or maybe different in some way, shape, or form, they need that encouragement and they need your belief in them that they can accomplish whatever anybody else can do, or they can, maybe they may need to go about it in a different way, or maybe their gifts and their strengths lie in other areas, that they need to know that you believe in them and that they are capable, and not treat them as if they are not.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I think that's great advice. What were some of the early challenges and obstacles that you had to overcome? I know that you were so young when you became an amputee. I guess maybe I should rephrase that. Were there obstacles or challenges? I interviewed a congenital amputee a while back, and he said there weren't because he never knew any different. So what was it like from your perspective?
Well, in a way, I agree because, like I said, this has always been my normal. I don't recall having two legs, and even if they had waited to amputate, the leg that I had really wasn't going to be functional and useful to me. So, I did. However, I can look back and see that yes, there were some challenges and obstacles that at the time maybe I just thought, well, this is just my normal and it's not a big deal. But I did experience with wanting to participate in activities like my friends. And for instance, in gym class, we did gymnastics and, trying to do the balance beam and uneven bars and things like that. Sometimes I had to go about it a different way or find a way that worked for me. And I remember having a gym teacher who was terrified of letting me get on the balance beam. He wasn't going to let me on it. And my mom actually had to go have a talk with him and say, look, you've got to let her do this. And he was like, well, what if she falls off? What if she gets hurt? And she's like, well, what if one of the other kids falls off and gets hurt? You deal with her the same way you do the other children.
Right.
Don't treat her any different. And he came to see that, I could figure out a way to do it. But I had to find, my own way. And I also did baton twirling while I was growing up and marched in parades and competed in competitions. And when I first started marching in parades, I could not make it through an entire parade. I usually made it about halfway through, and then somebody would have to carry me the rest of the way for my first probably few parades, or maybe, several. I don't remember at what point I was able to start finally getting through an entire parade on my own, but I'd be hurting so badly by the time I got partway through. I'd just, have to be carried. But I eventually got there. And so it just took practice, and it took just believing, I can find a way to do this and I can overcome those obstacles.
And I think that's a great attitude to have. I mean, especially when you're a young person dealing with various challenges and dealing with, I'll say this way, what the world would consider a disability. Throughout your childhood and as you're growing up and becoming a teenager and even as an adult, have you found it difficult at all to deal with body image or social acceptance because of being an amputee?
I worried about it in my teen years especially, but I think every single kid does, no matter what. And so I don't think that mine was much more so than any other kid, in that all teens worry about whether they're going to be accepted or not, and their self-image and their especially body image issues. And so, I went through a little bit of concern about, okay, well, is anybody going to want to date me, or am I going to be attractive? But I ended up having boyfriends, and it didn't really seem to be that big of a deal. Once I realized, there are people that are going to accept me as I am, and as long as I try to accept myself, that's going to help. Because I think that, if you can accept yourself and show that you have confidence, that's going to come across to other people and make you more likable or appealing to other people.
Absolutely. We often say that people who have confidence are some of the most attractive people in the world.
Yes.
Regardless of anything else. And you mentioned, wondering about dating and if people would find you attractive. And we often hear from amputees who have questions about dating and sexuality. For some, their experience is no different than anyone else. However, we see other amputees who lament over their present situation, and they'll say things like, I can't even find a date, or no one is attracted to me as an amputee. You're a nurse, and I was a therapist for 10 years, and we could discuss the psychology of dating and the fact that some of these amputees may not be emotionally ready to date at this point in their journey. So if we just look at the idea or concept of dating, when you began to date, were there these specific anxieties or frustrations or difficulties from being an amputee, or are you in the realm where it was more probably just like any other person?
I think in most cases, I felt like probably any other kid. Once I realized, hey, there are boys out there that like me, and my leg was not really an obstacle standing in the way of dating. I didn't have too much concern about it after, just kind of the initial when I was really a young teenager and thinking about dating. But once I really got out there and started dating and meeting people, it just, most of the time it wasn't an issue. I do remember one time of having anxiety over when my husband and I very first started dating, and he invited me to go swimming, and we'd only been dating for a very short period of time. And our college had a swimming pool, indoor pool at the gym. And he and his buddies were going to go swimming. He was like, hey, do you want to join us? Do you want to go with us? And that had never been an issue with me before. I loved to swim. I didn't have any qualms about going swimming and people seeing me without my leg off at the swimming pool. But for some reason, I got really super anxious and super nervous about how was he going to handle seeing me without my leg on for the first time. And was that going to be a deal breaker for him? And was he going to think differently of me? So that was really the only time I think that was really a big standout for me of having anxiety because of being an amputee around dating someone.
I know that you mentioned your husband, and I know that you've been married to your husband for almost 27 years.
Yes.
Let me say congratulations on that accomplishment. That's
Thank you.
Awesome. Share with us, though, a little of your journey. You mentioned you were nervous about him seeing you without your leg for the first time. How did the two of you meet?
We actually met in college, and it was our freshman year, just a few weeks into the school year. We'd only been at school a very short time and met at a Bible study in the lobby of the guy's dorm. And he had come downstairs because he wanted to buy a Dr. Pepper. He was thirsty and decided to go downstairs, buy a Dr. Pepper. He saw this big Bible study going on. And he said that he saw me and decided he wanted to stay because he wanted to find out who I was. So, and then after the Bible study, and then during the Bible study, he actually shared something about a good friend of his who had almost died in a car accident. And I thought he was cute, but then it was more beyond even his looks. I found him very attractive, but at the same time, his sharing and vulnerability and opening up about something personal like that really drew me to him. And he came over and talked to me afterwards. I was sitting with some friends, and we kind of got to know each other from there. And it was a few days later, we were sitting and talking, and he reached over to pat my leg because he was making a joke or something. He patted my knee, and then he was like, you could see his face trying to figure out, that didn't feel quite right. What was that? So then he eventually asked me, and I told him, I have a prosthetic leg. Mine is below the knee. So he was, oh, okay. He had no idea because he hadn't seen me in shorts or anything. I think I'd just been wearing jeans and he didn't know. And so it was kind of funny. But, we dated for 3 years. We've been married it'll be 27 years next month. And it's just been a great journey.
And it sounds like from listening to your story that your amputation, that you being an amputee, was not a big deal for him at all.
It really wasn't. And in fact, when he saw me at the Bible study, I was sitting with a friend of mine who has cerebral palsy, and he walked with a cane, had a very noticeable disability due to his cerebral palsy. And my husband said, part of what drew him to me was just my compassion for my friend and how I treated my friend. And I was like, but as someone with a disability who's grown up with a disability, just like my friend has, I don't see him as, oh, he's this different person and I have to have pity on him, or I have to treat him special or have sympathy for him. He's just a friend, and he's like anybody else. And, I loved that, okay, you saw that I have compassion and I care for people, but at the same time, I was like, I just see him as the rest of us.
Right.
So, and I loved that the fact my husband just, he just sees me as anybody else. He doesn't, my leg just really didn't play a big factor in things.
And that, and that's fantastic, because one of the things I've mentioned to a few people, I was already married when I became an amputee. So I'm curious about these stories of amputees navigating the dating world and getting married and how that works out for them. And it's refreshing to hear that you find someone who's like, basically like, yeah, no big deal. It's fine.
Yeah.
So that's really refreshing and kind of restores maybe a little faith in humanity from the things we see. One of the things I was talking just a little bit ago before we started our conversation today to our director of prosthetics, and he asked me a question that kind of I wasn't prepared for today, and we've talked about this, but he said, and this is how he worded it, he said, "What is that fetish called?" And I said, I said, "You mean devotees?" And he said, "Yes, that's it." He said, "You have to ask about that." So I didn't put that in the notes because I didn't know I was supposed to ask about that. But especially as a female amputee, have you encountered devotees in your journey?
I only have online.
Okay.
On Facebook. I've had friend requests from people, and then come to find out, they were devotees. And so I very quickly unfriended them and blocked them because, nobody wants to have to deal with that. I don't get it. I just don't get it. But I've been fortunate. I haven't had too much of that. I've been in some groups where people have talked about, just having lots of those issues and dealing with, trying to keep people out of their Facebook groups and things that, having to be you have to be discerning of who you
absolutely
allow access to. And so I'm very careful and selective about who I allow when people send me Facebook requests anyway, but
right.
I've encountered a few of them.
Okay. Yeah. It's, and I explained to them, I said, it's different because I've never had that happen to me that I've been aware of. And I said, I think it's really different for guys than it is for girls.
I think so. I think that there's more men devotees towards female amputees. And so that's probably, we have to deal with that a little more often.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you being willing to answer that kind of on the spot for us. So I was asked the other day by a female amputee if she could still have children. And my initial reaction was absolutely. But after her question, I thought about you, and I thought, who better to ask than an amputee who became a mom post-amputation?
Right.
And so from your experience, have there been unique challenges or circumstances to becoming a mother as an amputee and raising children?
For me personally, there really hasn't been, but I think the fact that I am, a below knee amputee as opposed to missing an arm, I think that makes a big difference, because we do so many tasks with our hands and our arms that might make it a little more challenging for things like changing diapers and feeding a baby and taking, holding and things like that. But, I know plenty of moms who do that just fine. And so I really think that it's more comes down to just, what are you comfortable with and finding ways to adapt. If there's, I don't know your friends or the person who asked you this question, what their level of amputation is or what caused their amputation. But I don't think amputation in and of itself should stop somebody from becoming a parent if they want to be a parent, because you can find ways to deal with any obstacles or challenges and find your own path of how to make things work. But for me personally, it really hasn't been a big deal, and my kids don't see it as a big deal. Half the time, I think they forget that I even have a prosthetic leg because it's just so normal to them.
And you're right. I mentioned something to my wife the other day. I don't have children, but we have two nieces that I absolutely adore. They are 4, and the other one will be 2 later on this year. And so they have never known me as anything but an amputee. And I said to my wife, I said, did you ever notice that they don't act weird that, with my prosthesis or anything? And she's like, that's all they've ever known.
Right.
They were at the house yesterday, and I'm currently testing a foot for another company. And so my other foot was sitting on the floor by itself. And so I did notice them kind of like, what in the world is this kind of thing? And they didn't ask or anything, so we didn't talk about it. But it's nice, when kids get to that point where they're just like, it's just life, whatever.
Right. And they grow up around it. So they just think, oh, well, that's just how it is.
Absolutely. So I know that you're a nurse. And so what point in your journey did you decide you wanted to become a nurse?
Well, I decided to become a nurse. I really felt, I personally, my personal belief is that it's a calling, that we all have a calling on our lives.
Absolutely.
And I really felt that pull and that call to become a nurse when I was about 15, 16 years old. Really about the age of 16, I was a junior in high school. And towards the end of my sophomore year, I'd had to have hip surgery. My hip socket was kind of basically coming apart. And I had to have hip surgery at the Shriners Hospital in St. Louis. And through that experience of being in the hospital, I ended up total of 4 weeks over the course of several months. There were 2 weeks for my surgery, and then a week a couple months later, and then a week a few months after that. And through being just, seeing the care that the nurses gave to me and to other patients, really led me to feel drawn to take care of kids in that way. Although I did kind of struggle with that because my plan had been I wanted to be an actress, a public speaker.
Oh, wow.
And if the acting thing didn't work out, I wanted to be a high school drama teacher, because I had a couple of drama teachers that were fabulous that I just thought the world of, and that world fascinated me, and I wanted to be a part of that. But God really worked on my heart and kept showing and confirming to me that nursing was the path he wanted me to take. And so I ended up becoming a nurse and working for a few years in pediatrics before staying home to raise my kids. And then creating MomRN.
And so you mentioned MomRN. And so as we've learned about you, you're a wife and a mother and a nurse. When did you decide to combine those 3 things and create MomRN?
Well, that actually was my husband had come to me back in the late 90s and proposed the idea of creating a website, because I was getting emails and phone calls and questions from not only family and friends about their health and their children's health and even parenting issues and discipline issues, because not only was a nurse, but I had put my nursing career on hold to stay home and raise my kids, and opened up a daycare so that I could still make some money and we could still survive. And so I was taking care of, several children as well as my own. And I was getting all these questions all the time. And it became not even just people I knew, but I started getting emails and phone calls from strangers saying, you don't know me, but I'm friends with, either one of my friends or a daycare client or a family member. And they told me you were the person to ask this. And so my husband saw that and he was like, you've got all these people coming to you for advice. You should create a website. And this was back in the late 90s. I didn't know anything about running a website or creating a website. I was like, I know how to check email and surf the net, and that was it.
Right.
So I thought it was a crazy idea. I was like, nah, I wouldn't know how to do that. I had a full-time job and I'm a full-time mom. So it took about a couple of years for him to, he kept, periodically bringing it up. And it was a God thing. I think that God gave him that vision, and it just took a while to convince me that, this really is something that we could do. And we found a way to do it. And back then, creating a website wasn't easy and it wasn't cheap. It was expensive, and it was, a lot more difficult than now.
Absolutely.
And we didn't have social media to advertise either.
You're right. I remember those websites, and you're right. It was difficult. It was extremely expensive. And today you can get, your website started in like 10 minutes.
Yes.
It's uncanny.
It's a world of difference.
When did you decide? So you have this website. When did you decide to go beyond the website and start the podcast?
Well, the podcast actually started out as a live radio show on a local radio station in Oklahoma City.
Okay.
And that came about because I was in the car one day listening to one of my favorite radio stations, and they had a program called Lunch Break at lunchtime. And the producer that had just taken over the show had said that she wanted to offer more parenting resources and topics and cover some more parenting topics than what they had been. And I really felt like, I should call her and just offer to be a resource for her. I thought, I might get one interview out of it. That'd be great. I'd done some television interviews and interviews online at that time. But, I thought, maybe she'll interview me, but even if not, I could offer to be a resource for her. And just, if she needs something on children's health or on parenting, I can, help her out with that. So I contacted her and we talked. And through the course of it, she ended up offering me my own show.
Oh, wow.
During the lunch break program. And, come in. It started out just, come in once a month and do an hour. And then it got to be twice a month. And when that went on for a couple of years, and then when the station sold, at that time there really wasn't much option for online radio shows. Podcasting really wasn't a thing yet, because this was back in 2006.
Okay.
So from 2004 to 2006, I was on live radio, traditional radio. So I didn't have the show for a couple of years because I would have had to pay a small fortune to try to do it online, or to go to another radio station and have to pay to do it. Just wasn't going to work. And back in 2008, then I was able to start it on, I found out about Blog Talk Radio and launched the AskMomRN show from 2008 up until the end of last year in 2016. And then this year I launched the AskMomRN podcast. Okay. A little bit different format than what I had been doing, but still really going back to our focus of children's health and parenting, family information.
Okay. So, I certainly want, and I hope that our listeners will check out your podcast. I listened to about 4 or 5 episodes over the weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I was listening to one episode in particular, caught my attention. In my current role, I'm the social media advisor for dilatory orthotics and prosthetics. And I felt that you had some absolutely wonderful advice and tips for parents when it comes to children using social media. And without giving away your entire episode, would you share a few of those tips with our listeners?
Oh, absolutely. It's very important that parents realize that social media is such a big part of our kids' lives and our lives, even as adults. Most of us, are very active on social media. And I hear from parents sometimes, they're like, well, I don't allow my teenagers or my kids to use social media at all because it's too dangerous. And I think that's taking the wrong approach, because it is such a big part of our society and it's a big part of our kids' lives that I think that they should be allowed to use it, but we have to teach them how to navigate it safely. So we need to be making sure that whatever websites or apps they're using, that they are age appropriate. A lot of, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, things, those big social networks that we're the most familiar with, those usually require a child to be 13 or older. Although I know a lot of kids who have created accounts younger than that. So you need to be on top of what they're doing. Say, yeah, you can have an account on there when you're the right age. And there are kids' social networks they can start on. Help them set up the account. Find out how the site works or the app works and the ins and outs of it, so that you can help them to learn to use it safely. And they need to know that you're monitoring, that you need to know their username and their password so that you can check, not because you don't trust them, but because you want to keep them safe and you want to help them learn how to use it safely so they can enjoy it and have fun with it without as much risk and danger. Because I think, banning a child from using social media tends to backfire. I've known friends of my kids who I would see at the library. One little girl in particular, one day I was at the library with my kids and she was on the computer and she was like, do you have it? And this was back when MySpace was big. I was like, do you have a MySpace account? I've got a MySpace account. And I was like, you're a little bit young to have a MySpace account. What are you doing with and do your parents know that you have this? Well, no, I'm not allowed to have one. So I set it up here at the library so they don't know. And I was like, yeah, that's not safe. And so I think that we just have to, as parents, I know it's a lot to keep up with. I know there's new apps all the time, new social networks coming up all the time, but find out which ones your kids are interested in and then work alongside them to help them learn how to use it safely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's really great advice, because I think we all see, whether you're a parent or not, if you're on social media, I think that you see kids that, I honestly think most of the kids mean well. They want to see what it's all about and they want to hang out and they want to feel like they belong. But I think at the same time, it opens the door for things not to be so safe for them. And so I think I think every adult wants to protect children and make sure that they don't get harmed. And we know there's a lot of predators in the real world and online, both. And so some really great advice there. And I know that you're a child safety expert. You've taught abduction prevention and child safety workshops. You've written for and you've been interviewed by numerous publications. I read this morning that you appeared on the Rachel Ray Show. And if my wife listens to this episode, she'll be rolling her eyes because I love Rachel Ray. And I think, and she doesn't. So it's just kind of a little funny thing between us. And I know that you wrote and you starred in Safety Smarts, which was quick safety tips that was used between shows for the Smile of a Child television network.
Yes.
I know a lot of our listeners and parents, I know that a lot of our listeners are parents. And so I want to ask, what do you believe is the best piece of advice that you can give to any parent for keeping their child safe, in general, keeping them safe?
In general, I think you just have to be a very involved parent and have open communication with your child. No, make sure your child knows they can come to you about anything. And I think a lot of parents still to this day, we have this myth or belief that, strangers are the danger that we have to protect our kids from. And, that whole stranger danger thing. And I don't believe in that. I think that is harmful, because most of the time, if a child is harmed by a child predator, it is someone that they have met before or that they even may know very well. And so what I teach parents and children is you go by somebody's behavior and actions, not by whether you know how well you know them or don't know them. If they are making you feel uncomfortable through either things they're saying to you or the way that they're acting towards you or things they're doing, then you need to go and talk with a trusted adult. You need to go talk with your parents or go talk with a teacher. And I think that parents worry too much, honestly. about abduction, because yes, it is a possibility, but it's, because of social media and because of 24-hour news, it seems like it's a much bigger problem these days than it was back when we were kids,
Right.
Especially for me growing up in the 70s and 80s, you didn't hear a lot about, occasionally you heard about a kid being abducted, but you didn't hear a lot about it. And these days it just, you hear about them all the time. So it seems like a bigger problem when actually the numbers have dropped a little bit over the years. And it's not something that parents should think that they can't let their kids go out to play. They can't let their kids ever go do anything out in public or alone because, something might happen. You just have to teach your kids how to be safe and smart and how to recognize if somebody may be a threat to them and what to do. And so, I've taught classes for several years for parents and for kids. And I'm going to have a webinar coming up very soon that I'll be doing on teaching social media safety as well as how to protect your kids from child predators, both online and offline.
Very good. So if we switch gears back a little bit to talking about being an amputee, what are some of the things that you have learned about yourself during your journey as an amputee?
I think for me personally, it has shown me that I can overcome challenges and obstacles, that if I put my mind to it, I can typically find a way to do it. And I know, from growing up, like I said, as a child and baton twirling, I wanted to twirl a baton, but, I can only make it through half a parade and would have to be carried the rest of the way. Well, I kept working on getting stronger and being able to finish a parade until finally I could, do that. And sometimes with learning tricks with the baton, it was a little more difficult because of my leg. And so I'd have to find ways to adapt. And so for me, growing up that way, it's taught me to, if I can't do it the quote unquote normal way everybody else is, I can typically find my own path and find my own way to do it. And so it's really given me kind of that inner strength of, okay, when I face an obstacle or a challenge, how am I going to address this head on and get through it?
And I think that's a very good way to look at life, and just, your story of being in a band and not being, with the baton twirling and not being able to complete a parade, but then you work toward to the point where you could. And, I think a lot of times people just need to be reminded not to give up.
Yes.
That, we can accomplish anything. And with that, all of us, whether we're amputees or not, we all face obstacles and challenges in life. And what are some of the things that you do or that you have used in your life that have helped you to overcome the obstacles and difficulties you have faced?
For me personally, faith plays a big part in not letting things prevent me from doing what I'm, feel that I'm supposed to do or want to do. I am a follower of Christ, and I do believe that my faith really helps me because, like you said, we all face obstacles and challenges, and the biggest challenges that I've faced in my life have nothing to do with my leg, have nothing to do with a disability. They've come through parenting and through just, other issues that come up in life. And so I really think we just have to realize that everybody that you meet is going through something.
Right.
You never know what the person, that you may look at and see, oh, you think they have this perfect life and everything's going great for them. And inside they may be fighting their own demons and struggling. And so you just don't know. And so I think really realizing that we're not alone, and that we have to reach out and find other people to help build us up and support us, as well as we need to be there for other people, and just be kind and treat each other with love and respect.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. In the brief time that I've known you on Facebook and reading about you and talking to you, I've been very impressed by all that you've accomplished and it doesn't appear that you've ever allowed anything to stop you or to get in your way. I frequently encounter amputees who are struggling not just physically, but emotionally as well. Some amputees, for one reason or another, aren't at the point where they're proactively working to reclaim their lives. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give them?
I really think that you have to take a look at what you want to do in life and what you feel that you're here for, and realize that it's not just all about you. For me personally, sometimes I have to realize that, okay, it's not about me. It's about serving others and helping others. And so I need to find a way to get through this so that I can do what I feel called to do. And you said it looks like, nothing has ever gotten my way, or I've not allowed things to stop me. I wish I could say that's 100% true. I actually, there have been times where I've let things, just either depression or anxiety slow me down or get in my way and keep me from doing what I feel I'm supposed to do. And so when I'm going through those times, I have to realize it's, what I feel that I'm supposed to accomplish with my life and do with my life is not about me. It's about helping others and serving others. And sometimes I have to use that to pull myself out of that self-pity or that, just sometimes we get so self-involved and so, and it's not that we're conceited. It's just, we're just so focused on ourselves that we quit thinking about how we're impacting other people. And I know that for somebody who has lost a limb later in life, versus me, who I've never known anything different, this is my normal, that's very different because you're going through a grieving process. You're having to change your whole way of life to accommodate this new normal and figure out a new normal. Right. And you're grieving a loss because limb loss is a lot like a death. And it's, for a lot of people that there's a grieving process that you have to go through. And so I don't want to discount anybody's journey or say, snap out of it or get over it, because everybody grieves differently and everybody faces things differently. For me, when I'm faced with, I'm just, I'm so depressed today, or I'm feeling anxious and I just can't do this, I have to get out of my head and think, how am I going to serve somebody else today? What am I going to do to help somebody else's life be better? And sometimes that'll get me through it. And, and then again, going back to my faith.
And I think that what you say there is very important, because we've all heard that old adage that the best way to forget about our own problems is to help someone else with their problems.
Yes.
And I think that's true, and like you, I'm a follower of Christ. And so, the principles and the things that I apply to my own life, when I look at people who are struggling, I'm like, I wish they could see this. And so it's hard sometimes. So anytime where I know ahead of time that, hey, this person, is a person of faith, I try to lead us that way to bring that in, because I want people to see that, they don't have to be stuck where they are. But it's hard work. And so sometimes I think people miss that. But I definitely appreciate you sharing, your faith and how that has helped you overcome in your life. Because we know that life is not easy. It's a journey. But with hard work and perseverance, I think any of us are capable of doing anything that God calls us to do.
Absolutely. And He will help us to accomplish it. When I decided to become a nurse and follow that calling on my life, I had a lot of people try to dissuade me from it. And a lot of people tried to talk me out of it, because not only because I have one leg, but I had also had hip surgery, and I was having very severe chronic pain from that. And my orthopedic surgeon hit the roof. He literally yelled at me when I told him that I planned to go to college to become a nurse. And he was like, you can't be on your feet for 8 to 12 hours a day with your hip and your leg. And how are you going to do that? And I just was taken aback. I was like, well, this is what God is telling me to do. He has shown me and confirmed time and time again, this is truly what I believe God has for me to do. And if this is what he wants me to do, then he'll make a way. He'll help me accomplish it. Not that it's going to be easy.
Right.
And it certainly wasn't. And I almost gave up halfway through college, I almost changed my major. But, I really do believe that, if you have that faith and you feel that this is what God wants you to do, he's going to help you to do it.
Absolutely. And that I think that's really, the biggest part of the message that we can share is we can look through history and see where people have, they've done what seems like impossible things. And people have tried to dissuade, and, people laughed at David. David said, I'm going to kill Goliath. And people laughed and said, yeah, that's not going to happen. But when God's in it, I think God allows us to be able to do the things that he wants us to do and has called us to do.
Very much so. We just saw my in-laws and my husband and I just went to Branson, Missouri for a vacation the past few days, and we got to see Moses, which is very interactive and musical play put on by Sight and Sound Theaters.
Yes.
And it was amazing. But, if you look at Moses and the great things that he did, but yet he was supposed to go and lead these people, and he was supposed to go to Pharaoh and demand that Pharaoh let his people go. But yet he wasn't an eloquent speaker, and he stuttered, and he had a very difficult time talking. And so God said, okay, take your brother Aaron. Your brother Aaron's an eloquent speaker, and he can do this, he can speak for you. God will make a way. And if he has shown you to do something, he will put the people that you need in your life. He will put things together to help you. As long as you're obedient and following him, he will make a way.
Absolutely. That's it. I couldn't have said it better myself. I've been talking today with Tamara Walker, the founder and CEO of MomRN and the host of the AskMomRN podcast. For more information about Tamara, visit www.momrn.com and connect with her on Facebook at AskMomRN Show and on Twitter at MomRN. Tamara, thanks for joining me on Amp Life. It has been fun.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate you having me on.
You've been listening to Amp Life, the #1 podcast for amputees, hosted by an amputee and brought to you by Dilatory Orthotics and Prosthetics, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave us a review on iTunes or give us a like on Facebook. I'm the Brian Moe. I invite you to visit our website, www.amplifepodcast.com, or check us out on Facebook at Amp Life Podcast.